Hello, friends. My name's host Eric. This is Rachel. We're here today to talk about how MBTI, by which we really mean the correct understanding of cognitive functions that's not MBTI, is going to save the world. From what? Maybe from a giant meteor. Those things threaten the world periodically. They're famous for causing doomsday in movies and such. Keegan Wheeler McCann says, no, MBTI won't save the world. Because only the correct understanding of cognitive functions will save the world, or because you're negating the premise that cognitive functions will save the world.
I say yes.
Well, and of course, the key thing here is Keegan Wheeler McCann. If you genuinely do say no, then the reason why cognitive functions will save the world is it explains why. Rather than instead of you just being wrong, it explains why your frame of reference negates that. And that allows people like me to not condemn you simply for being wrong, but to understand that you're using the wrong frame of reference in this particular instance because it's a default frame of reference, and coming to understand that whole thing takes time, The point is, in the existing status quo, we don't have a working model of human being that allows everybody to go, okay, well, this is why, even though I find this infuriating or irritating or dumb or whatever, that I need to understand it as some legitimate part of the other person's expression, and that my own response to it is as much a reflexive response built of my own cognitive function bias as it is anything else.
Ain't that the truth?
Mm-hmm. It is. It's a truth as big and fiery as this meteor about to strike the Earth. With just as much impact, too. Except instead of causing extinction, it causes instinction.
Instinction? What's instinction,
That's
Jose?
the opposite of being extinct. That's when you're totally into being stinky.
To being stinky, yeah.
Well, it's not me. I'm Rachel. We're just sitting on the sidelines watching. We're waiting for TE to show up to save the world. It's always TE that shows up to do the dirty work.
I was thinking if TE is saving the world, like I, as an INFJ, would be hiding under the covers.
Well, you'd be relying on some TE people with SE and various intuitions to figure out how to prevent this giant meteor that's already entering the Earth's atmosphere from destroying the Earth. You've got about a minute, to divert this thing before it destroys the Earth. So this is a particularly alarming and pressing meteor emergency. I could have gotten maybe a picture with the meteor further away from Earth to give TE more of a chance to figure out how to stop it. Or maybe it's just an optical illusion.
It could be.
Maybe it's actually burning up as it's going through the little bit of Mars atmosphere on its way to Earth, and we just can't see Mars, and that's just a perspective issue that makes it look like it's closer to Earth than it is. That'd be safer in that case.
It is safer.
Because it takes probably take a month or so to get from Mars to Earth, I would guess.
I like how in my bomb, the smoke curls a little bit, looking like druzy quartz.
Bong smoke is like the druzy quartz in the geode of life. There was a Twilight Zone episode where this mom finds a watch that stops time. She comes out of the grocery store one day and looks up to see the rockets incoming. What would you do? Well, I would have a serious problem with this watch existing, Because if it stops time, why doesn't it stop time for me? You know, why? It's not really a time stopper so much as it is a time stopper immunity device. Because time could be stopping all the time for everything, and we wouldn't know. There'd be no way of knowing. If in fact between this word and this word there was from some other observational perspective, this movie of existence was paused and they did some work or whatever and then resumed it, we would never know, right? The Sigmas will know. The Sigmas will know what? They will know that time has been stopped. Obviously, the thing to remember is this. There's only one good situation for needing time stoppage anyway, and that's if you're a high school boy who needs to stop time to squeeze the boobs of the girls in the class. Now, every male who's gone through high school, I'm sure, has sat at their desk wishing they had such a device so they could just get it over with. Just, I'm tired of sitting around with my hormones raging and all these titties bouncing everywhere.
What's the female equivalent of doing that?
Same thing. Girls want to squeeze everyone's titties too. Just because, that's just how it goes. Who doesn't like a good pair of knocks?
This episode of This American Life.
You said it just like Ira Glass. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation you had with Amy's Bridge Watch. Well, thank you for saying so, Mac Daddy. I enjoyed having the conversation as well, and I felt like it was a pretty good video. I guess the female equivalent would be if you're like a high school cheerleader and you want to make sure you know what you're getting before you pick your boy or whatever. You'd go and you'd find out what they got down there, and if it's adequate for your purposes, I guess.
That is the equivalent.
Yeah.
Of course, I think if there were, someone who, always showed off their boobs, and I had boobs, I'd be like, wow, they're always in my face, I have to feel them. But, checking out what they've got working for them.
Changing the subject abruptly, Oliver Linehan left a comment on that video in which he pointed out that when I say, as is a sort of a saying I've returned to on a number of occasions in the past, when I say that the difference is people using words versus people meaning things versus words meaning things. Obviously, there is a shift in the meaning of the word meaning there. So,
why?
In other words, one is a transitive form of the verb and one's an intransitive form of the verb. People mean something, okay? In other words, whereas words meaning things simply says words have definitions, people meaning things expresses that people intended to express something. So there is a definitional difference there, right? And if I were predicating a lot of argumentation on that notion, rather than using it as a shorthand notion to explain a concept in a sort of a metaphorical sense, then I would in fact be guilty of an equivocation fallacy. But I think it's also reflective of how Oliver Linehan has this third slot TI, where it probably gives him a lot of satisfaction to note that problem, point it out in the comments, and be correct about it, Well, I'm glad to hear that, Mac Daddy. Have you settled down with your type and started to make a family? Started to raise some youngins, you and your type? Or are you still what's that site called, like Many Fish in the Sea or something?
Plenty of Fish?
Plenty of Fish, right? That dating site that the basic concept of it is, No individual human is special. They're all
Oh my
they're
God.
all replaceable.
That's what when an ISTJ, when I was going out with an ISTJ, that's what he used to cheat on me with. Plenty of fish.
Right.
That's like stupid.
The thing about it is, it's a weird metaphor, right? Because it, if you think of plenty of fish in terms of you catching and eating fish, okay, that makes sense. But with chicks or whatever, it seems more like deciding on a pet than it does like eating the thing. So we have fish in the tank. We don't go, I'm tired of this fish now, and just throw it away and go, plenty of fish in the sea. Plenty of fish at the fish store. I'll get a different one now. They're just decorative anyway, right?
Oh my
we
gosh,
consider it like
for real. Like, that's real life.
we consider ourselves to have some sort of responsibility for his well-being, and we also get attached to it rather than tired of it.
Does my parents' divorce have any effect on what you think on us? What you think about us?
No.
Okay, cool.
Why would it?
I don't know. Some people are like, they do say they're like, well, if your parents are divorced, they're probably gonna get divorced because that's what they know.
I've already been divorced twice.
Yeah, that's right.
And my parents didn't get divorced.
Yeah, that's true.
SINI. In a nutshell, right? You can see the difference. It's so simple to see once you kind of like just get accustomed to recognizing the competing frames. She's concerned about what might be considered a universal rule.
Yeah.
That people who come from quote-unquote broken homes
Yeah.
are more likely to get divorced themselves.
That's legit.
And I discount it immediately because my own experience contradicts it. So, well, it doesn't really exactly contradict it. It instead contradicts the negation of it. So it's like it doesn't actually contradict whether or not you're more likely to get divorced from being in a broken home, but it's my experience is contraindicative of the notion that not being from a broken home prevents you from getting divorced. There's a lot of flies here in outer space.
That's the only
Surprising amount of them. We expected one of the nice things about there not being any air here in the fish, that we wouldn't have to deal with flies. But
yeah. No. Not in our space.
do you think Spacey told her she's an ESFJ? Who, Amy? Well, I mean, obviously my initial mistyping of her is better than that. I mistyped her as ENTJ primarily because I over relied on the rat test as an indicator of NI. But she knew herself well enough and was honest enough with herself to say, you know, I think I'm TI polar, and she was right.
So Spacey told Mac Daddy.
Oh.
I'm surprised.
I mean, he obviously doesn't have as much experience with you being a bitch as I do. You know?
That comes with the
you can be quite pushy sometimes. No offense at all. Hey, my daughter's an ESTP. I'm totally all down with you know.
Women.
Yeah.
Or just people saying what they want to say.
You're much more TI in your orientation and dealing with me anyway than you are FE, and that's consistent with third slot selfish FE. I'll deal with you the way I want to, and I would like if you perceived me the way I want you to as well. I mean, the idea that you have FE dominant is silly because it would mean he didn't really check your TI very much, because your TI is definitely better than fourth. So, and it means he didn't test really meaningfully to see if you were an SI user or an NI user. I mean, granted, you can't really distinguish in 4 or 5, but you should be able to tell that you're not polar. You know. Well, I mean, Mac Daddy, why would you get anybody to type you, and why would he even offer a typing of you over email?
Winston's mom.
That's not a meaningful way to type somebody.
No, it's not. Winston's mom, I was surprised too that he typed her as that, but I don't think I think as
that
of
doesn't
late.
count. If he typed her by email, it doesn't count. That's just silly.
No, that doesn't count.
It's like me typing you by how close you are to either the Earth or this asteroid. It's like Rachel and I would be pretty similar types then, if that were the case. We tried over a video and his girlfriend was bothering him the whole session.
God, that's funny. I can't.
I mean, life is a 9, I guess.
Yeah, it is. Life is a 9, yo. It is. So like, I mean, I have it second, right?
I mean, if I'm in a typing session and Rachel's being noisy, I'll probably let it go once, and then like the second time be like, Rachel,
yeah, I get Rachel.
And she goes outside or whatever, you know. Yeah. Not even my dad can really come in and interrupt work. He came in this morning and I was in the middle of want to talk to me about maybe my car having an oil leak. It doesn't. Those dots on the driveway are not from my car. They're old. I mean, they may have been from my car prior to the last time I took it to the shop. Winston's mom asked the pertinent question. Does Spacey have a sign on his back? Kick me if you were my girlfriend. Apparently.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm gonna pull a card for Spacey.
Oliver Linehan, I agree with you. I chose the word bitch there for comedic effect, not for accuracy. She's not bitchy, she's pushy sometimes. In a way that an ESFJ wouldn't be.
Right.
And she's pushy on TI matters in a way an ESFJ definitely wouldn't be.
That is true too.
And she's pushy on TI matters in a way that I respect and encourage. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. But she's not an ESFJ.
Yeah, no. I'm surprised that he got it that wrong. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be like opinionated, but I am surprised that he got that wrong.
I mean, if you typed her by email, it doesn't count.
That doesn't count at all. That's like getting one of those like fake horoscope things, like my name is Ula and I will tell you your future if you pay me $10. Like,
is codependency functions or nurture? I'm not sure I really understand what codependency is. I mean, you might think that Rachel and I are codependent if you use certain kinds of definitions for that, which is to say, we spend almost all of our time together.
We do.
And if I'm going somewhere, usually I'll either be going with her, or I'll inform her I'm going somewhere and I'm going to be right back, or I'll ask her if she wants to go, or something like that. In other words, it's not like we really have independent lives, but at the same time, we're each very accustomed to doing what we want in the moment. So, sometimes Rachel wants to sit here with me in live stream, and a lot of times, the majority of the time probably, she prefers to sit over there and just sort of listen or participate in the chat.
Yeah. I do. It's very comfortable. So I picked a card for spacing, and I feel like this is like accurate. I picked the Ace of Pentacles, which is increased new money gig. He's got his new gig going on. He's making new money, I guess, but
Will typology save the world? My answer is yes, and that to the extent that we move that time frame up, in other words, speed up that process of it becoming understood and accepted as the the singular universal metaframe. And the thing is, in all of human history, people have been looking for that, the single universal metaframe. But it's been available to us since Jung came up with the idea of cognitive functions. But until it all fits and makes sense and is rendered into crystallizations that everybody understands, and until the disinformation falls to the side in as the primacy of the singular correct understanding of it gains momentum, then we'll be able to exist in a world with less reflexive ontological assaults. As it stands, every person who is an example of a type is also going to have another type that they tend to meow with, right? And they'll tend both of those two types will tend to dismiss, say nasty things about, undervalue, and not get that other type that they're pow-powing with. It's not necessarily like I suspect that ENTP pow-pow is a lot more ESFP than ISFP, even though ISFP is called by sociologists the conflictor type, and we have no functions in common. At least with the ISFP, their dominant FI doesn't conflict so much with the tool TI as tool FI does. Yes?
So I pulled a card for Mac Daddy, and you got Judgment, Ascension, Completion, Zenith, number 20. And that makes sense because, I feel like you're here because you got type by Spacey, you're done questioning your type, ESTP.
Here's the thing. Let's imagine a world where every medical doctor and psychologist understood psychology questions through this frame of reference. So then people would bring their kid to get tested for ADHD. And the doctor would say, okay, well, your kid's definitely an SE dom. You can see that. Very low chance of an NE dom, but he's one of the two. And so we know that a certain amount of challenge with the constraints of the conventional expectations of society is implicit in being those types. Now the question gets framed, do you want us to prescribe these drugs that help him to adhere to those conventions better, or do you want to understand the conventions as the problem and affirm the differentiation of your child as legitimate, even if it conflicts with those norms? Now that's a much more meaningful way to engage the question than is your child has some sort of something wrong with them that we have to treat,
Sure, this Genzennial I will do. And Mac Daddy, these cards are the Rock and Roll Tarot from Vicky Verily. You want to pull the one?
Sure, what am I pulling for? Who am I pulling for?
Genzennial.
Genzennial ISTP. Genzennial for you and me. For you and not me, you get some love and joy in your heart today. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally gay. Feel, heart, open, create. Beginning, love, joy, fun.
I bet you didn't think that one was coming, did you?
Great. Isn't that wonderful? That's so nice for you.
It is so wonderful.
No, it's not necessarily the case. And this is what I'm talking about with this film thing. Okay, Mac Daddy, look. In order to explain how and why the motion picture, is moving, we need to understand that it's broken down into single individual frames. Okay? But we can only understand so much about how it moves by looking at the individual frames. So in other words, what you keep doing is stopping the film and saying, you are telling me this is a moving picture, but in this frame it's not moving, and in this frame it's not moving. Well, that's because you stopped the film to analyze it, okay? So it's true that analysis is never going to be able to binarily remove all holistic aspects from personality. That doesn't mean that there's not a single best reduced representation of it. In other words, just because maps are never actually the same thing as territories doesn't mean there's no differentiation between good maps and bad maps.
I want to express my demonstrative FI by saying, if we were on Love Island, I would totally want us to win. I'd be voting for us, I'd be rooting for us, and I think we would win.
But the thing is, Rachel, neither of us would ever have been on Love Island. That's the problem with that idea.
That's I'm demonstrating. My feelings.
Well, you can't necessarily. There's still a fair amount of art to it. It's not all science at the moment, Mac Daddy. You can be very confident when you see a bunch of things that all line up with a certain type. So, for example, if you are SI polar, then what that means is I'm specifically going to see a paucity of concrete experiential examples, a paucity of explaining things through their own experience or understanding things through their own experience, and a great abundance of explaining and understanding things through non-particulars, universals, patterns, rules, etc. So we can check that phenomenon throughout. I can test SI polar directly and say, yep, you can't really do any examples, any concrete, specific experiential examples. But we can also pay attention to how the communication plays out across the board throughout the typing. So if in fact she's really SI polar, whoever this person is, imaginary person I'm testing, then we should see that. Then we should see a total, basically, complete absence of concrete personal examples from the entire conversation. So that's the sort of thing that we have to factor in when we are correctly typing somebody. In other words, our test can be a strong indicator, but if it's correct, it should be consistent with something else that correlates across the board. And not everything do we have something that concrete to correlate against. So until somebody is nailed down exactly, they said, okay, Eric's identified this person as definitely Mia, and there's lots of good reason to believe they're definitely Mia, and so we can start this as a baseline. Now let's do that. Now let's do this brain scan thing and figure out what brain light up pattern represents whatever. If they do in fact correlate one-to-one like that and are exclusive of each other like that, then fantastic. Then we'd have a concrete way to say you are this type. If you just wear this hat that measures your brain waves for a full day, we'll be able to tell you at the end of the day what type you are, no problem. But until that happens, we have to use some NI basically. Now NI for you is instrumental, so you're trying to get it so where it's going to be determinate for the SI, which is more important for you, the experiential knowing, but you're never going to accomplish that because it's backwards.
And yeah, I think the Genzelnial is gonna get laid tonight. I do think that's what that card means.
You're going to get laid out in your regional hockey game by a big hit against the boards, big check. That's what it means.
So I want to get the opinion of the audience on my tri-type being 794. So Peter Dentici, or Dentici, how does it say? How's he like us to say it? Dentici. Peter Dentici. He gave Eric and I the core Enneagram test, and Eric turned out to have the highest amount of 7 that anyone has ever gotten on the test that Peter
I got 31 to 32 sevens, whereas
you got all 7s.
Whereas Rachel got equal numbers of 7s and 5s. Mm-hmm. But I've concluded that she's definitely a 7 and not a 5.
Yeah.
But I agree with Peter Dentici's results that she's probably a 9 and not a 1 like I thought. And Peter Dentici gave us the official Enneagram test. In fact, I recorded the part about it where he talked about the results and stuff, and then I accidentally deleted that video, which I'm sure he thinks I purposely didn't put it up because I didn't like it. I just accidentally deleted it when I was making room on my hard drive. Anyway,
so I had self-tested 2 years ago on a quiz on similar minds about Enneagram, and I got 9 at one point, and so I was surprised, but I wasn't totally surprised.
That's how I'm going to save the world. I'm going to eat that meteor.
That's good. It's going right in there. That's so bad.
That's how you're going to save the world. Eat that whole thing.
That's good. Yeah. It's a good solution.
I've got a big appetite. I just have to increase my scale to make myself big enough to fit it in my mouth.
Yeah. No big deal.
I mean, I agree, Mac Daddy, that Oliver's TI sparkles because he's FE second. So he doesn't write any comments in which it doesn't sparkle.
It's true.
That's third
They
slot.
are sparkle.
That's third slot TI scorecard reward as managed by a very deft second slot FE that, you know, the thing is this. An ENTP has the problem, habit, and life experience of sitting down for some sort of meeting and saying 5 or 6 things, each of which is quite significant and insightful or whatever. And they'll always be overshadowed by the person who says one thing that's insightful that really, because then people just associate that one insightful thing with that person. One or two things. You know, it's like FE is aware of space, ideational conversational space, a lot more when it's in the second slot than it is when it's in the third slot. Hi, Ike OGMN.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So the Genzennial took the tri-type test too from Peter, and he says he's 5, 8, between 8 and 9, and 3.
And you know, I got as many 2 as I did 4, but I don't think there's a 2 in my tri-type. The thing is,
I don't think you're a 2 either.
The thing is, I don't like that test the way that it does things, right? So in other words, if the tri-type understanding of Enneagram is right, then you have one of those things from each of the 3 areas. One head, one gut, one heart.
Yep.
So the test should be structured such that it always pits the hearts against each other, and instead it pits it against everything. So are you more of a 2 or a 7? Are you more 2 or a 5? Or are you more of a 2 or a... Yeah. The problem is if it has 2 questions on the test, it says, are you more of a, let's say a 2 or a 6? Well, I'm going to say 2 probably because I'm not very much of a 6. In my head type, in other words, it's very clear which one I am. I'm 7. If it says 2 or 5, I might say I'm a 2 because I'm not very much of a 5.
5, right.
But the problem is that doesn't mean that I have a 2 in me. It means I don't have a 5 in me. And if the end result is I've got as many 2s as I do 4s, then I think, okay, there's a bad testing modality here because even though I feel I'm more split in my third tri-type slot than I am in my first 2, I don't feel like I'm as much of a 2 as I am a 4.
Yeah, I think you're... I don't know.
I mean, am I helpful? Well, yeah, it's like, in a very limited scope, yeah. I like being helpful to certain people some of the time, but you know, I also have plenty of like, this is not my problem.
Yeah, I feel like you're
Not
very
my
individualistic. Problem. You're more individualistic than, here, let me help you.
Right. For example, yesterday someone at the gas station asked me, hey, can you help me read what it says on my pump screen? I said, you go fuck yourself. Somebody did ask me to do that. And I helped him. I said, yeah, it just says, do you want to join their club? Like, for 5 cents off a gallon. You don't want that. Just push no. It was a guy who didn't speak English very well. Anyway, and he was also old, so he probably didn't see very well. I usually have to ask Rachel to read small print for me, so I'm not accustomed to be the person who's reading something for somebody else. Well, it's not true that everybody asks questions, Mac Daddy. It's absolutely not the case. It's shockingly not the case. Like, you want to get one over on somebody, it's very simple. Don't address the thing they say directly and watch them not notice. It happens all the fucking time. People expect it all the time. Like people use that, they expect that to work on me. It doesn't ever work on me, but it works on everybody else. You know, it's like anybody wants to say blah 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 blah. I can usually, if I wanted to, I could just sidestep it, respond not on point, and nobody would notice or say anything. That's the truth of the matter. You get a couple of FI users together, they take turns saying, I like sailing. I like sailing too. The wind feels so good. It's nice when the sun's out. We could go swimming. They say shit like that, you know. No offense, ISFPs, but you know, you get a couple ISFPs or INFPs together, and they'll spend hours talking about how and why they like something so much and why it's so great and moving and meaningful. That's not really asking any questions, you know? TI questions are specifically for clarity, so as to establish consistency or negate because of a lack thereof. If I'm asking you, hey, would you mind picking up a quart of milk on the way home? That is not a TI question. If I say, hey, how you feeling? That's not a TI question. If I say, do you know where I left my meow? That is not a TI question.
So, I have a question about what function was going on when my dad, what was going on with the functions when my dad tells my sister, okay, we're gonna go eat, and then instead takes her to a concert to meet his new girlfriend, and no food was there.
Very simple. It's countervalued FE, weak, underattended to SI, and touchy SE, combined with an NE Dom who's coming up with new ideas all the time. Well, we were going to go get food, but now I feel like meowing. Looks like we got some mail. With the countervalued FE. Hi, Dad. Thank you. What is this? Document eligibility.
I don't know. It's just junk mail. What did they say about the car?
They didn't indicate any sign of any oil leak.
Oh, I still know what that is. I don't know how I got enough that was older. All right, and I got the photos. I was down today, and it was totally different. She was almost comatose.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I have to go. Well, anyway, I got to take care of the insurance. So.
Maybe they'd just given her her meds or something.
Yeah, she was at lunch, but she was just busy smearing the puddle from the water on the table.
Well, you know, Rachel and I get there for dinner. It's like right after she wakes up from her nap.
Normally, I'm down there 2 or 3 in the afternoon when she's watching her classic movies.
Yes.
The one that was on yesterday had to be from like 1930 something. It was so old looking, this movie.
I was just amazed. She was responding and semi-coherently.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but it wasn't that today at all.
Well, you know,
Comes and goes.
comes and goes. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So it should go over to
The Jiffy Lube across from
by Denny's?
Yeah.
they had the filter.
Yeah, they did. I did the whole 9 yards. I got the platinum one. So to change the filter, top off the coolant, and
So you should be good for another
4,000
4,000.
or 5,000 miles. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Thanks, Dad.
All right.
Talk to you later. I got my oil changed in the car today at the Jiffy Lube.
This
These
guy.
are the sort of important topics that the ESTJ likes to discuss. It's harder for you to answer the questions and easier for you to ask because TI is a get function, and for you, it's not combined with extroverted intuition, it's combined with extroverted sensing. So you'll always be able to much more successfully deal with TI in terms of parsing objects external to you, and you won't by default expect yourself to come up with the alternatives because you're using it purely, more purely as it's meant to be used as a judging function. Whereas for me, it sort of just constrains my extroverted intuition so that if I want to be most easily validated as competent, I'm going to have to present stuff with my extroverted intuition that's sustainable via TI. But if I want to get the most results that I want to get, which are more FE things, I really have to pare down the TI and provide more FE and more, I guess, NI understandings of things. People like FE friendly metaphors. So, that's the kind of content that is most enjoyed, including probably by people like me. It's not like I necessarily enjoy super TI heavy content. I typically can't watch it. I find it boring. I can't even watch my own videos when I'm really TI heavy. Eventually, not show business. Yeah, eventually I'll be president. But I've sort of done a what's that word? An assayance? I don't know. I've done a reassessment of the situation and understood that the road's longer and slower than my optimism was indicating to me. So I have to be a little bit more realistic in my progress, and my expectations, I mean. And ultimately, that's one of the areas where it kind of links back to cognitive functions again, in the sense that there is a prime directive, and there has to be, if we want a good model for humanity, we have to have some single thing that we all have in common. Some standard against which each configuration tests. And that standard is closing the gap between map and territory. For in simpler words, it means having reality meet your expectations. So it's like if you go into an activity expecting to win $1 million, if you win $200,000, you're going to be disappointed. If you go into an activity expecting to win $0, if you win $200,000, you're going to be very happy. Now, most unexpected occurrences like that are negative things in life because they tell you that there was a failure in your understanding prior to this event happening. Something significant happened and you should have anticipated it. So that's what PTSD is all about, for example. If you're driving down the road and all of a sudden you hit an IED, if you hit an IUD, you're probably fine. But if you hit an IED and your army truck blows up, and it made a certain crackle sound, then you've associated that crackle sound before it blew up with something blowing up. And let's say there's an equivalent crackle sound in the regular world. But because that unexpected deviance from your map, namely that you can drive down the road without blowing up, was so stark and traumatic, a deviance from the map, then you're going to like desperately overmap thereafter and say, okay, well, I'm looking for any cue that might indicate this is going to happen again, because now I need to incorporate the reality that this happens sometimes into my expectations. Of course, that doesn't happen sometimes. That happened once and probably will never happen again. But so driven are we by this prime directive of being able to expect what's going to happen that PTSD is is a phenomenon that occurs when our expectations are starkly distinct from our realities. And BPD is an example of how mapping expectations that were set deep into a person in childhood will cause them to destroy good things, so that their expectations that things be shitty don't get refuted by reality. That's BPD in a nutshell. I have a map that says everybody betrays me. If you don't, I'll make sure you do. Because I refuse to have that map be wrong.
Yeah. Jeremiah Fix says PTSD when the instinctive part of one's mind creates a maladaptive response.
Mac Daddy, I would say yes. It does mean that Oliver Linehan is by default more susceptible to that. However, I would say that he's an example of what happens. SI is much more customizable than NI. You know what you learn, and so he spends a lot of time learning about cognitive functions, and just like after spending a lot of time playing the guitar, I no longer have to think about what shape my fingers make to make a G chord or a D chord. It's just really automatic. So the more Oliver Linehan familiarizes himself with processing things through this frame of reference, the more robust his analysis can consistently be expected to be. It's an advantage being an SI type that not many SI types take advantage of, because they typically focus on less cerebral matters than this, and or just don't come across it or something like that,
We're moving in space.
Yeah, well, Rachel, I'm gonna let you stay here safely on these clouds for a minute while I go into outer space. My hands are cold. I want to warm them against the meteor. Right.
You're almost there. There you go.
That feels good. There. That's better. Okay. Yeah, muscle memory is SI. So, somebody might say, well, how can you have knowledge that's made just of experience? That's not even knowledge. That's just, muscle memory. Muscle memory is a perfect example of knowledge that's made of nothing but experience. There's no meaning to it, really, or the meaning is very small. So it's like there's a meaning that is just this letter G over these words on some lyrics and chords, right? But the expression of it is not something that I ever deductively attain. In other words, while I might be able to deductively attain it by saying, okay, well, what's a G major chord? Well, it starts with a G, and it's a major third above that, and then it's a perfect fifth above the G. So that would be a meow, meow, and a meow. I don't even know what it is, but and I could find those notes on the fretboard and shit, and I could deductively correctly arrive at the chord. But if I had to do that every time I played a chord, I would never be able to play a song, right? It's too slow. And this is a good way to distinguish between things that require a knowledge function, like playing an instrument, that you know a bunch of shit, and things that don't require a knowledge function nearly as much, like questioning the legitimacy of something that doesn't seem to make enough sense. That's if you go approach somebody else's words and say, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't make sense, you're contradicting yourself, blah, 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 blah. That doesn't require as much knowledge. It doesn't really require any knowledge, because the only thing you're doing is evaluating the objects that are in front of you for their legitimacy against a universal standard that you are well habituated to using. No, I haven't read Jordan Peterson's book.
Maps of meaning.
I mean, the thing about that is, when he says maps of meaning, I already know from listening to him enough that he's got the frame of reference wrong. So it's kind of a lost cause. You know, he's chasing unicorns. Unless you get the frame of reference correct on the whole thing, then you're chasing unicorns. He's trying to universalize things about humanity that are specific to his type and his frame of reference. In other words, he's doing the same thing I described in a video earlier and described earlier in this video that people have done for all of eternity. I'm a philosopher, so I'm going to remove myself from this equation and objectively analyze the world. This is what he's trying to do as well. Of course, any actual objective analysis of the world and reality includes an explanation of why you are doing that. He ignores that. So, you know, he's lost. He's lost like a lamb in the woods. I'm not a shepherd. If he gets too close to me, I might be a wolf. You know? Because he's defenseless against reality and the truth. He would get thrashed in any kind of argument with me about anything meaningful or substantive. Sure. If he, to the extent that he disagreed with me. I would send him home with a very sore bottom indeed. So, of course, I'm small fry. I'm never going to be able to engage the guy into an actual debate, and there would only possibly be negative outcomes for him. Because I'm small fry, even if he were to soundly defeat me, he'd be seen as a bully of some sort. If I were to beat him, it would be huge for me, but it would make him look bad, worse than if somebody bigger than me beat him, right? So there's absolutely no TE frame of reference in which it makes any sense for him to debate me about anything.
Sounds like it.
He literally lost his mind for a little while. Is that what... Is being in a coma literally losing your mind?
Oh, wow.
I guess it is, or at least misplacing your mind. Putting it on...
Yeah, misplacing it?
Putting it on... Turning it off for a while, I guess, you know. I mean, that's SI polar for you. Only an SI polar person would think it's a good idea to have yourself put into a medically induced coma in order to avoid the discomfort of coming off of benzos, of kicking benzos.
Oh, that is very intense.
I agree with Oliver Lionhand that I don't validate on Jordan Peterson's frame of reference, just as he doesn't validate on mine. And, you know, ne'er the twain shall meet, because he fundamentally will always assume he's good enough on the TI, and as a consequence, if you catch him kind of live, real time, you might make some headway. In other words, he's not immune to self-critique on those grounds, but you're not going to make any headway with genuinely trying to distinguish between the experiential and universal, because he's SI polar. So it's like, I mean, I might be able to help translate it to some extent to him, but deep down, he sees experience as fundamentally the wrong way to frame human beings. So, you know, No, he's SI polar, I think. He's ENTJ. I'm quite confident of it. I can think of one or two examples that he's given. But even those they feel so constructed and archetypal. Like, for example, one time he gave an example in something of a sports star in Vegas who, when he'd arrive, would be met by this group of attractive young women from whom he was expected to choose one with whom to spend the night, you know. And then Jordan Peterson said something like, "Don't get me wrong, this is really something. This is really, really quite something. It's not nothing to be sneezed at. It's quite an accomplishment in some regard." I thought, are you serious? Nothing to be sneezed at. It's something to be actively condemned. What are you, an idiot? I mean, he's treating those people as objects to the extent that they're okay with it or participating in it freely or consensually. That makes it not overtly wicked, but any pro-autonomy assessment of the situation negates the situation as a whole as undesirable or less than ideal, at least, you know. So it's just, I mean, talk about getting lost in his NI all the time at the expense of a real assessment of people's experiences and linking back to that NI in a way that makes it more meaningful, you know. Oh, he doesn't seem TIFE at all, dude. Everything is efficacy related. Everything's utility related. And his tool function, the way he expresses himself, is all archetypes. It's all references to myths and meanings and maps. And, you know, it's like he's of course, he's on the wrong train to Wrongsville. But I'm not the conductor of that train. I'm not even on or anywhere near that train, so there's nothing I can really do about it. That's the thing about TE people. They get to laugh all the way to the bank, but they're not right. Don't make that mistake. Don't think the TE people are correct about things. They just win all the concrete metrics. But they're still wrong. You know, I mean, in terms of understanding things, they're responsible for every horrific thing that's ever happened in history. Like, why do we put the Japanese in internment camps in World War II? TE. That's why. Well, you know, we better do something that will minimize this risk that we haven't established the actual significance of it all. Right? That's fucking textbook TE ignoring the TI objections. That's history's full of shit like that. So who wins the actual battles? Most of the time, it's going to be TE. And the reason is because correctness is like a forest. You have to continually protect it. Once it's cut down, it's, you know, so it's like all TI can do is hold back the barbarians. And TE will periodically make yet another scope of land that was formerly under the protection of TI, will render it into a hellscape of utility-driven justifications. And there's nothing the TI person can do but see you fuckers? This is why you should listen to me. And then you get Eric complaining for a long time how nobody listened to him about COVID when he was obviously right. It doesn't matter. I was right, but who won? The TE people won, right? My being correct didn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
So for people who look to objective metrics like, well, who won the actual battle, you're going to go, well, Jordan Peterson's more correct than Eric, right? He's winning more of the battles. He's winning the actual battles. He's more famous. He makes money. He's got a PhD behind his name. He has a clear place in the ideological spectrum as this alt-right figure or whatever, he must be more correct than Eric. Well, I mean, it's not a terrible heuristic. It's almost always true that if you're comparing Jordan Peterson against your average armchair philosopher, Jordan Peterson is going to be more correct. But I'm an exception. I know. Well, I need to make in my Redbubble store some shirts that say, I was thinking about what to put on a shirt. One of the shirts I want to make is just going to say, I don't like to wear a mask. One of them might say, I don't want to wear this mask.
I'll wear those.
Or another shirt might say, I don't want to tell you whether you should wear a mask. I don't want to force you to wear a mask. Well, I was thinking a lot about it. You know, my first instinct was making sure it just said masks are dumb. But the fact is, I need to convey the central point, which is, whatever you think about masks, remember, if it involves my face, you're out of your jurisdiction. You have jurisdiction over your own face, not of mine. I'm not afraid of your germs. It's great, Jeremiah Fix, actually. That is fucking fantastic. That's the best thing you've ever said in the whole time you've been here around this channel. I shit you not. That is the best thing you've ever said. That is perfect. I'm not afraid of your germs.
I like that too.
It's great. It's fantastic. This mask may prevent disease, but it causes sadness. Postmodern personal responsibility, only doing the right thing when the government isn't telling you to? No, I mean, the thing is, that's absolutely not the case, Gen Xio, because I wear the mask inside every store I have to go into. I have to wear the mask. I'm in LA County. We have some of the stricter mask policies in the country. So the reason the shirt works so well is it drives home the point. I'm obeying the law, but I'm pointing out that I don't have an opinion about what you should do with your face, and that maybe you should question whether or not this law is just. How much justification do you need to tell me what to do with my face? Especially when it's regardless of vaccination status. So it doesn't matter if I'm vaccinated and purportedly can neither catch nor give anyone the disease. I still have to wear a mask. Explain that to me. Explain that one to me, Gen Xio. Why does somebody have jurisdictional authority over someone's face who's fully vaccinated? Because vaccines aren't perfect? How many countermeasures to possibly spreading germs is somebody proactively, positively responsible to undertake before their very being is considered safe enough to enter the world? If you really want to eliminate all possibility of disease transmission, you're going to have to put everybody in a fucking bubble. Is that okay? See, you have to answer core axiomatic principles here. How much jurisdiction and under what conditions do you have over my face? Well, I don't believe in the efficacy of the thing. No, I wouldn't wear it. I find it uncomfortable. I find its negative impacts to be greater than its positive impacts. You might say, well, that's being very selfish of you, Eric. I'm not being selfish. Other people can wear double masks. People can wear triple masks. I don't give a fuck. People can do whatever they want with their face. No, I wouldn't wear it. I think it's stupid and silly. But the point is, I don't want to have to win that argument, right? I should win that argument because the amount of action taken by a given government body should be proportional to the threat. The amount of seizure of autonomous decision making ought to be proportional to the threat. And this has been disproportionate from the get-go, and no sane, right-thinking human being can say otherwise. It's been disproportionate from the get-go. We have plenty of examples, and this is vastly over-responding compared to comparable examples by anybody's reasonable measure. And additionally, if you look at the World Health Organization's 2020 PDF, which I happen to be studying right now in my capacity as a debate coach, they indicate that government's responsibilities for dealing with potential health threats include ensuring proportionality. In other words, that the amount of action the government takes should be proportional to the scope of the threat. Now, and of course, what this fucking report didn't say, though, is they should be responsible for actually solving a problem. So, in other words, remember, Gen X, and everybody else, all this COVID nonsense we've been through has not prevented them from announcing massive COVID numbers, right? Massive numbers of people dying, getting the disease, blah, 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 blah. So why did we go through all that rigmarole? It's just health theater. It's like, well, we don't want any fish to get through here, but we can't prevent all the fish from getting through here because they're smaller than our mesh. Well, let's put up little spots of very small mesh where they can't get through. Well, won't they just avoid those? Well, yeah, but it looks like we're doing something.
So true.
It's insanity of the worst sort, you know? It's insanity of the very worst sort because it sets a terrible precedent. For anybody who supports all these mask mandates and stuff, you also support mandates prohibiting single individuals from having sexual intercourse with each other. Because after all, there's a chance they may transmit AIDS, and there are something like 900,000 or 1 million people a year die of AIDS still, even though there are medicines available to treat it. So we can't be allowing single people to have sex anymore. That needs to be mandated as well. And there should be no more driving. That's not permitted. We need to control everybody's diet. You want to hear something real interesting, is look at the actual causes of death in terms of health risk factors in that WTO/WHO report. And what you'll discover is that the vast majority of articulable risk factors that are responsible for the vast majority of what are called DALYs, which are disability affected life years, are from diet. Now, if you include malnutrition part of it, it's almost all diet. So in other words, it's caused by obesity, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, heart disease, right? So now all of a sudden, Gen Xial, because of the reasoning that you continually supported from the get-go, you also support forcing everybody to eat what you say is healthy. Even though each individual person has their own diet that's healthy for them. And even if it's the case that the majority of people, it's unhealthy to eat fast food, it's not the case for me, who has a tendency to be underweight and who needs a shit ton of calories to not starve to death, especially fat and protein. It is the case, of course, that children raised on a high-protein diet eating lots of meat have higher cognitive abilities than those who were raised in a low-protein environment, because that high protein enables the body to maximally attain its optimal possible growth. So these things now all of a sudden we're mandating to every parent what they must feed every child. They're all justified by the same kind of reasoning that you're using to justify these COVID policies. Everything like this is justified. Anything is justified. Because nothing's justified by what you're saying. In other words, the fact that my existence itself poses potentially a risk to others when I go out into the world and breathe is not a justification for controlling my face. Period. You haven't even established I'm sick, have the disease, I'm contagious. Even if I'm vaccinated, I still have to wear the mask. So, in other words, this is the problem we have because people like you, Gen Xial, argued the wrong arguments at the wrong time, and it gathered momentum. You accepted the wrong arguments instead of challenging them as you should have. And then everybody bought into this bullshit, and all of a sudden we've got a new reality where there's no fucking principle controlling or constraining anything. that the rule of law itself is toppled over by the slightest mention of a bad cold spreading. I can think of countless laws that suddenly were no longer enforced once COVID happened. Not by any action of the legislature, not by any action of any judge, just because public officials who were maybe like a city official or a county official or a governor or something just made arbitrary unilateral decisions, often which contradicted each other, and all of which applied to the individual citizens, purportedly. Now that is pure fucking insanity. And for people who aren't willing to at this point say, you were right, Eric, I was totally wrong, you were completely right about the COVID and everything you're saying about it, then you're just not being honest with yourself. Gen X, listen, I have heard you support these COVID policies many times in the past. What I'm saying is, in supporting these policies, you are making those arguments whether you make them explicitly or not. They're implicit to what you're saying. So, no, I do not accept that I am strawmanning you at all. If you are in support of all these mask mandates and stuff like that, and vaccine mandates and stuff like that, and I've heard you be supportive of them in the past, then you're missing the point, right? And yes, I'm correct to attribute to you the underlying frame of reference that's necessitated by what you're saying. For fuck's sake.
Do you mind hooking a trigger up?
I remember when all this shit first started, I was a lone voice in the wilderness. Even here among my own community, there was no agreement with me at all. Gradually, more and more people have come to agree with me that I was right all along, because I was. And I want that point hammered again and again and again until the whole world knows that Eric called this shit. It's complete fucking bullshit, and that everybody should agree. We should revisit the whole topic and understand the consequences of taking action which sets precedent that we don't want to set. It's called TI above FE. I love you too, darling. I mean, if you ignore experience, Gen Xial, it's easy to wear a mask. Yes. My mask tends to smell bad, or I don't like the smell of my own breath. It's uncomfortable on my nose. I'm a little fussy in that way. To you, those impacts don't matter at all. My experience doesn't matter. So even if I'm vaccinated, fully vaccinated, I should have to wear a mask because it's so easy to wear one, right? Regardless of whether I like it or want to wear it, right? The idea that it's easy and without consequences is, of course, incredibly stupid. Who aren't you caring about? Everybody with a hearing disability who can no longer communicate in the world, whether they're vaccinated or not, because of people who make stupid arguments like yours. You're not even counting the real impacts of the thing that you're promoting the mandate of. That's wicked and stupid, to be blunt. It's irrelevant, Winston's mom, whether I've been vaccinated or not. You know, it's like... The fact is, I often have to pull my mask down to make myself understood by people in the world, as they often have to pull their mask down. At that point, it's a completely pointless bit of health theater. And people who say that it should be forced on everybody or that they're irresponsible if they don't agree with it can go fuck themselves because they're so wrong. It's like your support of this health theater, Gen Xial, because I'm telling you the truth. The fact is, those masks are just a gesture, a theater towards health. In fact, shit tons of people have them halfway down all the time. They're constantly having to pull them down. If you watch, they've created two classes of people. Those who are important enough to not need to actually wear their mask, and those who are not important enough. They've created a situation where the poor have to wear masks much more frequently than the wealthy do, because they take public transportation. Is that what you wanted? Are you counting these impacts? Or are you just counting the impacts you want to count? That's what's wicked. That's what's called utilitarianism. You're just counting the impacts you want to count, and you're saying that people are irresponsible if they don't agree with you. Well, if you count all the impacts, people are irresponsible if they do agree with you. And that's the fucking truth. What do you mean it's a problem? This hydrogen bomb clears out all this land. It's filled with stuff. We'll have all this empty land now. You forgot to count about killing all the people and destroying all the city. Who's counting that part of it? We're only talking about the impacts we like. No, Gen X, that's fucking stupid and wicked is right. It is. It absolutely is stupid and wicked, and you're better than that. You have to count all the impacts. If you're gonna justify shit with utilitarian justifications, you better have done your homework and measured all the possible impacts that are possible to anticipate. And keep in mind that you're gonna have unintended, unanticipated impacts as well. You didn't do any of that shit, so don't come talking to me about being responsible. That's just because this particular mandate doesn't bother you. If it were something that bothered you, you'd take exception to it. It's like these fucking idiots who like go, oh, well, let's tax cigarettes more, let's tax gambling more, let's tax whatever, because it's not their sin. They have their own sin, you know? And it's like there's this obliviousness that like, oh, it's fine if I demonize this marginalized group because they behave in a morally permissible but dirty thing like smoking, whereas my own habit of buying a bunch of stupid purses that I don't need is perfectly fine, you know? Well, I know. And that's the problem, is this notion that we need to take emergency measures because a novel disease has emerged is contrary to science. We knew going in that this wasn't going to work because of all the specific factors they articulated about COVID. That because of the long incubation period, because of the novelty of the disease, the lack of immunity to it in the naturally occurring population, and the fact that it was airborne and transmitted, that no matter what kind of measures we were going to take, it wasn't going to quarantine it successfully. I articulated this at the very beginning of this mess, before they started doing all this stupid shit, you know? It was very clear. They gave us all the information we needed. Oh, so you mean quarantines won't work, is the conclusion that one would draw there. Instead, they said, no, it means we have to do a bunch of theater, pretending like they're going to work, even though we've given you all the information to prove that they won't. So, I mean, how do you explain that? Fucking idiots. Idiots and morons. That's all I can say. It's like, I don't know what else to say about it. It's the only honest thing I can say. The world is filled with idiots. I said right at the beginning, this is based on an appeal to ignorance. People are saying we don't know what it might do, so we have to go take extra action. You can never justify action with an appeal to what you don't know, obviously. Well, how can we explain that was a winning argument globally in newspapers all the world around? People are fucking stupid. That's the only explanation for it. It's the only explanation. The thing is, the practicality of living always renders the always counterfeits the masks. Even if they work as promised, it will always be counterfeit by the fact that people are always pulling them down to make themselves understood, which renders any preventative thing moot.
Also, I'm not gonna lie, when I was in the mall and I got myself a drink, I pulled my mask down to drink.
As did everybody sitting in the food court eating, right? Because if you're eating, you don't have to wear a mask. Of course, if in fact the risk of an unmasked person is so great as to compel the need to force everybody to wear masks, then they can't eat anymore. Not out in public. You can't just say, well, we'll split the baby in half here. Our justification is we have to lock the baby in a cage. But people don't like that, so we're going to let part of the baby out. Well, then it's like saying, well, let's put a fence around the cattle so they'll stay in the cattle yard, but let's put a big hole in the fence so they can get out when they want to. That doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry. It doesn't make any sense at all, right? And so a lot of times, heretofore, people have said, well, then let's shut down restaurants. And they did for a whole fucking year. It didn't make any sense because the basic principle that every individual and every business has a proactive responsibility to prevent the ill health of others is fundamentally false and needs to be rejected categorically. Yeah, do I believe in God? I self-identify as a Christian. I engage in faith-based behaviors and have a healthy magical thinking frame as part of my identity. Which means I understand faith correctly in that it's not to say that one believes in God or doesn't believe in God is to commit a category error. That faith-based behaviors are not subject to affirmations and negations of language like that. So, it's like we don't debate about the existentiality of anything else. Can you think of anything else we debate about the existence of? Do unicorns really exist? We don't debate about the existence of anything except God, which is an interesting fact to note, but the reason we don't debate about the existence of something is it creates immediate contradictory premises, okay? So if you debate about the existence of a named thing, you're saying this named thing, which for it to be named, there must be an instance of it, and once there's an instance of something, it attains the status existent. Is this named thing existent or not? Is a question that includes contradictory premises, basically. Climate change. Well, climate change is definitely real, and it's definitely anthropogenic, which means it's been caused by human activity. However, that anthropogenic climate change started 10,000 years ago, not 100 years ago. As soon as agriculture started to take off, the climate started to change. And in fact, the most recent ice age would have been a lot more of an ice age, except for anthropogenic climate change. Now, the real question regarding climate change is not whether or not it exists, or how bad it is, or what the threat is, but rather, what frame of reference should we approach it under? Should we approach it under a mitigation frame of reference or an adaptation frame of reference? If you want to approach it under a mitigation frame of reference, then you're going to be in favor of things like carbon caps and reducing the amount of carbon put into the atmosphere. If you approach it under an adaptation frame of reference, then you acknowledge that this cat's out of the bag. Nothing we do now is going to prevent climate change, and any unilateral efforts will actually worsen the speed of climate change, assuming the curve is linear, which there's not really any good reason to assume that, but let's assume it is for carbon. If we unilaterally reduce our industrial produce, then it'll be picked up by BRIC countries, Brazil, India, Russia, China, which produce things much more dirtily than the first world nations do. So it's like you have to, in that regard, this is a question that requires a pragmatic frame of reference, not a principle-based one, because it's not about individuals and their rights. So obviously governments are much wiser to invest in solutions rather than try to slow the advancement of climate change. As I've made an analogy in the past, when people in the olden days started pooping and peeing so much that their cities could no longer contain all the sewage, they didn't make rules that people had to poop and pee on different days, like you can poop and pee on Tuesday and Thursday, and no, they said we need to deal with the sewage better. The same thing is true with with greenhouse gases that we emit as part of our product of living, and that produce meaningfully describable and measurable changes to the global climate. So in a world where we have a much warmer global climate, we can anticipate certain kinds of changes and certain kinds of problems that are going to arise, including more extreme weather. So an adaptation approach says, well, let's invest these resources that we would be wasting on reducing economic activity into preparing cities and infrastructure for being better able to withstand extreme weather. That's a much better approach. Now, obviously, of course, additionally, if we were to come up with a silver bullet, a black swan, as they say, some sort of new technology that could successfully, cheaply sequester large amounts of carbon, then all of our efforts to mitigate climate change would be rendered retroactively moot. In other words, it would have turned out to all have been a waste of time and energy because some black swan came along and actually solved the problem. Historically, black swans are what happen in situations like this. That's why, for example, the Malthusian notion that humanity would run out of the capacity to feed itself at population meow was falsified, because our means of production of food improved so dramatically that each square acre of land produced vastly more food than was the ceiling anticipated by Malthus. So that's what I mean by a black swan coming in and sort of changing the conversation fundamentally. You think, therefore you are? Listen, Lee Man, I want to make this clear. You don't have to prove your existence to me, okay? I believe in you. I believe that Lee Man is our future. Teach him well and let him guide the way. Show him all the beauty that he possesses inside. That's what we need to do. Can we all agree to do that with Lee Man, please? Because he is the future. He is the world. He is the one who makes a better life, so keep on giving. He meow 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 meows. To meow the meow meow meow. Yeah, I was talking about the little ice. Yeah, I was talking about the one that would have been a real ice age, except it was a little ice age because it's posited by climate scientists now, because the impact of agriculture blunted the coldness of that ice age, or that was going to be an ice age. That's what they say. Are they right? Well, you have to ask them, I guess. I suspect they are, because it's true that if in fact putting in a bunch of carbon in the atmosphere has caused change, well, that really started with domesticating animals and doing agriculture, because then we had, you've got a bunch of, the idea of preparing a field to be planted involves composting, adding animal dung, which produces chemical reactions in the soil that release a lot of gases and stuff that might otherwise not be released into the atmosphere. Additionally, the removal of large swaths of previously wild forested land meant there was less vegetation to take in the carbon dioxide and put out oxygen. So that makes sense. I want to find a Sasquatch. Does anybody know where one is? I'm not even talking about 1800s. I'm talking about before that. I'm talking like 10,000 years ago. The point is that as humans stopped being hunter-gatherers and started settling, population rose, and a lot of the efforts of humanity to build civilization involved a lot more, energy usage. For example, if you have a big army, they're all having campfires at night on the plains of whatever. That's a lot more carbon being released in the atmosphere than a bunch of animals farting there. So it's just how it is, Remember, wood is a fuel as well, and people naturally emit carbon dioxide, and people naturally remove vegetation and put concrete over it and stuff. So or paving stones or whatever. Anyway, the point is, it was very slow and gradual atmospheric change until the last 150 years or so. The Industrial Revolution obviously sped up that process dramatically. But the point is that the accumulated carbon impact from, say, 10,000 years ago to that little ice age that Horsemuller was mentioning was sufficient to blunt the effects of that little ice age. But of course, well, it's also the removal of the natural carbon dioxide removing things. If a human society chops down an entire forest to construct things, open up arable farmland, etc., well, depending on how big the society is, it could be quite a chunk of carbon removal taken away from the immediate environment. So I think there's a Sasquatch in Canada. Yeah, I want a Sasquatch. I want to see one. I want to see one in person. I want to catch it on film. I want to catch some pictures of it too. Ideally, shake its hand and give it a Talking with Famous People shirt. And ask it to wear it in the photos. Would be nice if it was a really agreeable Sasquatch. Hopefully they speak English. I'm assuming they do. Hopefully it doesn't speak Canadian. I have to be extra polite. It's true, Rachel. You don't hear many people saying, you know what time period I'd like to live in? Medieval times. You know, I wish I were born in the Dark Ages. I wish I were born as one of those monks that whipped themselves every morning to beat the sin out of their wickedness and make the Dark Ages go away. Well, it's not 100 years. When's that little ice age you're talking about? It's like 2,000 years ago or something, right? We're talking about 8,000 years of accumulated increasing human activity being sufficient to blunt the full impact of that large ice age. The increase of agriculture and whatever. I'm not saying I'm convinced that there's sufficient evidence to conclude that, but the evidence is basically correlative. You know, it's like, well, right around the time when agriculture started, supposedly according to the archaeological record, then there's a corresponding gradual increase in temperature or something. I don't know. Like, I don't give a fuck, really. It doesn't matter. I could be wrong about that. I could be right about that. I'm just reporting what I've read. So, the thing is, the key thing isn't how it came to be exactly, although that's relevant. We need to know a lot more about what is the actual curve with carbon dioxide. What I think is really interesting is that, as far as I can tell, nobody's actually answered that question. So, you know, because we could imagine carbon dioxide being like this. The more carbon dioxide, the hotter the atmosphere. We could imagine it being like this. The more carbon dioxide doesn't really matter. Whoop, now all of a sudden we reach a point where it goes like that. We could imagine it also going like this. More carbon dioxide makes it hotter. Now it doesn't really matter anymore. You've got the maximal amount of heating that the carbon dioxide can accomplish, so more of it won't make any change. We don't really know, or I have not yet read a definitive account of what that curve looks like for carbon dioxide and atmospheric heating. So if we don't know that, it seems kind of important to know that. Doesn't it? Before we start making any big claims about what we ought to do. Because how can we know if it's going to solve a problem, or if the problem even has inherency? See, that's why any kind of plan, any kind of affirmation needs to have inherency. It needs to first establish that a problem exists in the status quo that won't solve itself unless we take action, and that the action we're purporting to take has an actual solving impact on the matter. It doesn't have to solve it completely, but it has to have solvency. Thanks, Flow State. The I used this one because I wanted to demonstrate the technique I'm going to use to save the world from a meteor when it comes to strike the Earth. I'm going to just fly up into space and it's going to be like, I'm going to eat that thing. Eat the whole thing. That's how I'm going to save the world. Hello, my host. How would the autocrat and underling dynamic arise in an ENFJ, 8-slot TE, and dominant FE? Also, what are some conditional logic videos of yours do you recommend? Okay, well, it would play out as in an ENFJ that their solvency is always ultimately purposed in ways that make them look good in the eyes of others and make sure they retain the validation of others, and or in order to sculpt the perceptions of others. So the TE isn't really applied for if they're on their own free time just twiddling around the house. They're not going to be drawn to TE things if it's in their 8th slot. They're going to be drawn possibly to SE things instead, like going out and playing racquetball, or I don't know, just doing shit. So, okay, well, I don't remember horse numbers, so thank you for the information. Do I have any prescription for climate change? Well, my prescription is adaptation, not mitigation, and investing in something that actually solves the problem, such as improved carbon sequestration technology, rather than in trying to mitigate the problem by reducing carbon output. That's my prescription for climate change. That it's real, we need to do some things about it, but not something about it, okay? We need to do some things about it, not something about it. So if you're trying to say we need to do something about it, you're trying to say we need to solve this problem right now. We need to do some things in preparation for the changes that necessarily are occurring as a consequence of climate change. We need to prepare for more extreme weather. We need to prepare for higher seas. We need to prepare for longer growing seasons in some areas and desertification in other areas, and assorted things that are likely to change. We should be aware of how those changes are going to occur and where we are going to be able to meaningfully invest to adapt, and where we're going to have to abandon a given location and relocate. And those things are good, smart policy approaches to something that we fundamentally can't prevent from continuing as it is, that we might maybe slow a little bit in this kind of utopic vision where everybody just unilaterally, all in an agreement, decides to stop producing things and making carbon. But I mean, it's just crazy, right? It's just crazy. The thing is, human beings by nature, by being what they are carbon producing machines. We produce carbon in our breathing, we produce carbon in our poop, we produce carbon in our urine, we produce carbon that falls off of us in the form of dead skin flakes. We are carbon making machines. So the idea that we should somehow limit the amount of carbon people make is dumb. Instead, we need to do a better job of being a massive world population of human beings in a way that is more consistent and sustainable with the environment that houses all those people. So that in some sense it means adapting what we do, and in some sense it means adapting the environment. When it comes to making carbon, we can't change that any more than we can change how much we poop and pee. So we can shift to green energy. The thing about that joke about that, of course, is the actual shift to green energy, that process of generating these new technologies and manufacturing these new technologies to replace the old ones, creates an immediate bump in the amount of carbon production that presumably is counterbalanced by the long-term reductions, right? But of course, if you were to ask the the climate change alarmist camp, they would say there's an urgency for us to solve the problem now and cut off carbon production now, which would preclude the generation of new green energy that could replace existing old dirty technologies. So it's it's people who aren't thinking well, who want their cake and eat it too, and don't meaningfully understand the way things actually work. And that's the problem with utilitarianism in general, is it counts the impacts it wants to count. So you get these people who are going, well, climate change is bad. It's bad for the environment because it's changing, and polar bears are drowning, and yada yada yada. It's caused by carbon, therefore shut down carbon, without any nuanced understanding or thinking about the matter whatsoever. So that's obviously very frustrating to those of us who think well. Nobody's disputing climate change. I'm not disputing climate change. I've never disputed it. I agree it's anthropogenic, which means caused by humans, and caused by human activity and productivity and such. I forgot all about the steaks.
Oh my gosh. I did too. I had.
How long are they on the grill?
Wait. You look great.
Yeah, they don't look bad at all.
Mm.
They were on indirect heat.
Mm.
I never really got into direct heat, but they were on indirect heat for such a long time. They're totally done.
That's great.
Yeah, it worked out fine.
Aren't that fun? Itadakimasu.
Oliver Lanham, I think you got that backwards. Virgins cure AIDS, according to some Africans. They're wrong, but that doesn't stop them from raping virgins. TE in its very worst manifestation. So, anyways, you may have deduced I was cooking some steaks and then I totally forgot about them. But, luckily, Irish, it turned out perfect anyway. HIV/AIDS denialism? Why? If you'll be my Valentine, flow state. Genexial is encouraging me to ask you, flow state, will you be my Valentine?
Does that mean that I'm rejected from being your Valentine?
Well, I want Taylor to be my Valentine for St. Valentine's Day. You will be my Valentine on St. Valentine's Day. St. Valentine's Day is a new holiday that's being recommended for bromances.
Oh, okay. That's totally great. Mm-hmm. I'm very pro of that.
It's a demonstration event at the Olympics. Flow state? Listen, there's no reason to be that jealous, okay? You can both be my Valentine. Well,
does that mean we have to give?
Yeah, it means I have to give at least some heart-shaped candies to Taylor. Okay, you can't get all the heart-shaped candies. Sorry, it's just how it goes.
Jeez, I wasn't expecting this.
Well, it's a new post-heterosexual reality we live in.
Oh, man.
In which, even for straight guys, in order to be politically correct, you need to embrace your bromances.
How can I be against that?
Right. I don't think Genexial doesn't think people lie to him. I think Genexial is having trouble detaching from a team-based frame of reference. And it's kind of understandable because for years prior to the last few years, there's been a somewhat disturbing anti-science narrative emerging from various camps, various political camps, that is disturbing because in an ideal world, we'd all have our own interpretations, but we'd all share the same facts. So, things like climate change. Is climate change real? Like, is the globe getting warmer over time? Yes, it is real. I mean, the thing is, there's never been a moment in the history of Earth in which it wasn't engaging in some kind of changing climate, getting hotter, getting colder, whatever. It's just what the climate does. Is the fact that it's getting hotter so fast right now the result of human activity? Yes. It is. Let's say you don't like the policies of the people who want to cap carbon and all this stuff. You don't need to deny what's obviously the case, deny the facts in order to disagree with their interpretation of them. So, opposing climate change alarmists who are proposing legislation that's a bad idea should be done on those grounds, not on the grounds that climate change isn't real. And when people start doing that, they're saying, I reject the idea that facts should be central to this conversation. And that's disturbing. I think Genexial felt as though, okay, now I know which team to be on. Nope. COVID proved that, in fact, the other team is just as stupid. You can't ever be on a team. The team is what is the mechanics that causes the wrongness to persist. So it's like, there's a big concern about misinformation being disseminated. They're linked to some like big conspiracy theory things, like the Sandy Hook shooting and things like that. But at the end of the day, they're pitting the wrong two things against each other. It's not science versus non-science. It's nuanced and robust argumentation versus weak argumentation. And that's the problem. Of course, if you think you're on science, if you think you're on team science, then you'll be wrong every time the voices of team science are wrong. If you think you're team anti-science, if you think your team, you know the truth regardless of science, then you've abdicated your responsibility to meaningfully justify your public claims about policy. So it's like the only way to actually figure out who's right is to do an argumentational critique rather than particularly a science critique, right? It's usually not the science that's wrong, it's the arguments people are making with the science. The thing is, there is a reasonable campaign against established knowledge. So, for example, the problem is not at all described correctly by whether a given piece of knowledge is established and whether or not somebody's opposing that established knowledge. This is an example of somebody being team science, right? So what's the problem then if not established knowledge? Well, let's look at it. We've got something like evolution. Evolution is the predominant frame that through which pretty much everybody in all contexts discusses speciation, the origin of the species and stuff like that. In fact, evolution is the predominant frame through which biology itself is discussed in the contemporary status quo. And yet it's wrong. I've proved that many times over. I don't want to get into it. In contrast, most conventional understandings and narratives of things are not wrong. So, in other words, being an iconoclast successfully means being able to distinguish between those very few examples where consensus is wrong and the vast majority of examples where consensus is right. And the only way to do that is with really strong NETI and plenty of experience in argumentation. I mean, I don't think anybody says the Earth is a perfect sphere. Except for the perfect spherers. No, the Earth is neither round nor flat. It's an absolutely perfect sphere. Maybe that's what I believe now. I believe it's a cube, actually. I want the Earth to be a cube. Everybody likes cubes. Who doesn't like a cube?
I just imagine I was jumping off again.
Or you gotta rappel down one side of the earth.
Yeah. Then like it moves with you.
I mean, think about it. Let's say you were at a party and they had used a melon baller to make round globes of cheese. Next to those globes of cheese, you had your conventional square cubes of cheese. The globes and the cubes have toothpicks in them. Which ones are you going to eat? You're clearly going to eat the cubes. Why? Because there's something wrong about round cheese. You hope the world's flat? I hope it's gently undulating. I hope it's gently undulating like a flying carpet for space. My Gently Undulating Planet will be my documentary on how the Earth is neither flat nor round, but like a tapestry gently undulating in the space wind. And whether you're on the top side of it or the bottom side of it, that depends on when winter is. So if you're on the top side of it, winter comes in regular winter time. If you're on the bottom side, as everything's backwards, winter comes in the summertime. I mean, look, let's even broaden the choices here. If you were to have a globally shaped cheese, a cubically shaped cheese, or a pyramidically shaped cheese, you would still go for the cube. The pyramid, you'd be like, why is this cheese a pyramid?
Yeah.
How did they get it to be this pyramid shape? You'd wonder a bit about it. Well, I mean, do you think the Jet Propulsion Laboratory is bullshit? Because remember, before there was the National Aeronautic and Space Association, there was the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I mean, surely you don't think that that the story of using jet engines is bullshit? Do you? Do you believe in jets? Or do you think that when we get on the 747s, as soon as we're up in the air, they hide their fake jet engines and pull up biplane propellers? I mean, if you believe in the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and you believe in the concept of escape velocity, then NASA's not a huge reach, you know? Eli Laus Yesalian, listen to me. I'm going to combine your idea and mine. It's a thick tapestry, a thick undulating tapestry, rich with womanly allure.
Oh my God, no.
In fact, it's a velvet, or at least velveteen, rich, thick, undulating tapestry in the shape of a woman.
Oh, wow. So it has curves.
Yeah. So if you want the most room, most comfortable ride, you put your legs around her waist and you sit on her butt, you know. Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't watch a lot of space videos, but it is the case that when I look at the moon through binoculars, I can see it a lot better than when I don't. Plateaus are just petrified tree trunks because trees used to be real big. Wow. Fun. Where's the top half of the tree? Why did that not petrify? Why did only the trunk petrify? Did the top half just topple over and break into small pieces and turn it eventually into dirt as things walked on top of it, or what? There would be some big trees. Depending on the size of the plateau, of course. If that's a plateau were the size of one of my butt cheeks, it would just not be a very big tree. But if the plateau were the size of 2 of my butt cheeks, it would be an enormous tree, because one of my butt cheeks is vastly larger than the other. Little known fact. Plateau tree broccoli florets. Yeah, the thing is, in the ancient world, before all this bullshit about round earth and stuff, when everybody just knew it was a giant undulating thick tapestry in the shape of a woman blowing in a space wind, back then when we knew that, well, we also knew that all the trees were just giant broccolis or asparagus. So in the olden days, there were only 2 kinds of giant trees. They looked just like and tasted just like broccoli and or asparagus. The people of the world used to worship those as the trees of life, because you could eat them directly, and that was fine. You just go walk right up to it and just take a bite out of the trunk of it. It was more woody than the top part of the florets, but still quite delicious. Same with the asparagus. The higher you climbed, the more tender the tree. Regardless, those were all chopped down by the dinosaurs when they built their cities in Mesopotamia. Little known facts about Earth history. Ocean water is just fish piss. Salt water doesn't exist. Well, I mean, probably that's why it's salty, because there's salts in the pee. I don't know much, but I do know this. I want my child to someday be considered woody. Asparagus makes your pee smell like rubber. It makes your pee smell like you've been eating asparagus. I don't know if I would call that a rubbery smell or not. I would say this: most good sativas taste like vinyl tubing smells. And most bad fast food sodas taste like urinal cakes smell.
I love these associations.
2 truths. 2 truths for us to mull upon. If you haven't had a urinal cake soda before, it's not unique to the Jack in the Box near my house, although they're one of the worst culprits of it. But I'm convinced that it's caused by whatever they use to clean the soda machine, and that cleaning thing that they use is scented the same smell as the smell of urinal cakes. That smell is used in urinals because it covers over the smell of pee, I guess, pretty well. But for an SI person like me, my association with that smell and urinals is too strong to ever break. So there's this kind of candy called Blue Shark's candy that tastes exactly like urinal cake smell that I will never eat because it's so gross. It's this particular kind of lemon limey-ish kind of smell and flavor. Yeah, I cannot, as soon as I smell it or taste it, I cannot disassociate it from urinal cakes. If I had a choice between a urinal cake candle or a soda machine cleaning smell candle, what should you buy? They'd be exactly the same. That's the problem with this one. Those would be exactly the same candle. There are 2 names for the same candle. 2 different names for the same candle. So, if I ever own an establishment that has a urinal, I'm going to hereby promise to have a cake-free urinal. We don't need a cake in our urinal. We'll be like a fancy restaurant and put ice in it instead, We'll put ice and some mint in there or something. I don't know. Why even make the men use a urinal? They should just have a very tall, regular toilet next to the low toilet. So you can pee into a bowl like normal and flush it like normal.
Yeah.
It's just taller.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Right. It's the stand-up toilet instead of the sit-down toilet. Why does the stand-up toilet have to be a urinal?
Yeah.
Why can't you poop standing up? Why isn't there a toilet that lets a man poop standing up too? So we can really be, maximize our superiority over women in that metric right there. Because one of the things we do have over women is we have an easier time peeing standing up.
Yeah.
Well, let's take that existing strength, double down, and make sure that men's bathrooms afford the increased capacity to poo standing up as well, while women's bathrooms continue to force women to sit down. It's like a good way to reinforce the patriarchy. Well, I mean, that's the thing. Urinals are good ways for me to splatter my shoes with pee. But there's also the truth that it depends on the urinal. The better urinals don't go all the way down to the floor. They stop like here, and then they go up here or whatever. The old-fashioned urinals go from like your head to your feet, like at the Coliseum or something. The newer urinals also have a B on them for you to pee at, and it's a good place to pee because it's like they put the B where the minimum amount of splatter occurs. So if you hit the B, you're pretty okay. But in general, urinals are just a way to get pee on you. Really, they're just a way to urinate such that you get at least some pee on you.
I've learned so much about urinals.
Yeah.
And men's bathroom endeavors.
Yeah. Really, we should just staff all the men's bathrooms with chambermaids. Women whose job it is to like hold a bucket underneath your butt. Eric's plan for reinstating the patriarchy. If you do a reverse pelvic thrust just as the poo exits the anal sphincter, could you ensure the poo hits the back of the urinal and slides down, or would it bounce off and hit you? I mean, that's really going to depend on all the particulars, the size, scope, firmness of the poop. How bouncy is it? Most poops aren't really that bouncy, I don't think. But I haven't tried to bounce a lot of poops, so I could be wrong about that. It's a good question. It's an important question. Right. Well, if you want to create the effect of concentric golden halos around you in the snow, you do as Taylor does. And just put your hands behind your head and spin around in a circle while urinating. Of course, to be completely safe, you probably should have a very strong urine flow. If you've got an older prostate, you might end up getting a little on your shoes. Do you think the more constipated you are, the more bouncy the poop is? Is that what you're trying to say, Oliver?
What about I think the person might be more bouncy.
The person's more bouncy once they get the poop out of them, for sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Out of them.
But the question is, if it is harder poop more bouncy than softer poop? It would seem intuitively yes, right? Softer poop will just splat on the ground, whereas the harder poop will bounce a little bit. Up to a point, though, as Oliver points out here, there will come a point of hardness where it's almost dry, at which point it might break into pieces.
Yeah, that happens.
And that doesn't count as bouncing. So these are all important questions, and when it comes to engineering the new standard pooper for men only.
Oh.
You got to stick your dick into a hole for it to start working. That's how you make sure women can't use it. For security, it's got like a dick print reader. Push your dick down on the little screen, and it pops up Eric Strauss. Eric Strauss, welcome. There's a big database of dick prints that we used to make this happen. Otherwise, how are we going to make sure women can't use them?
Yeah.
Now, granted, you are sort of unintentionally encouraging women to cut off penises if they want to use one. The only way you could grab a guy's dick print without having him in tow is, But that's true of fingerprint checkers, too. And yet people still use fingerprint as a security thing because they think that the risk of people chopping off your fingers isn't great enough to justify opposing fingerprint readers. I would say my chadliness varies from 0 to 10 depending on the moment. If you're talking about chadliness as being generally like, hey, I'm the sheriff around here or whatever, have a wide variety of degrees of chadliness depending on my mood. Do you think anyone has ever developed a personality model based on people's bathroom habits? I mean, you could try to make a video where you go, this is how I expect everyone to go to the bathroom. It's like that video series I made a long time ago that still gets views and comments sometimes, which is how the Mia shops for groceries. People really liked that concept, even though it just seemed like just kind of some whatever kind of notion, but people liked it. So,
There you go.
do you know a YouTuber called A Bass Luciel? No, I don't. Do you? If you don't either, then maybe it doesn't exist. Is that my phone?
Yeah.
Do I have a texter texting me words of encouragement? You go, girl.
I hope
It
so.
says. Let's find out what it says. Does it say you go, girl? It says, just pictures that this guy's sending me. I forget what this guy's name is, but he texts me all the time. He's from like Lancaster, which is here in Southern California. I'm like his live stream. He just sort of texts whatever he's thinking about at any given moment. A lot about different weed strains. Sometimes he sends me pictures he's taken of things. I don't know. Okay, well, I think I'm about ready to call it a wrap. Gen X Heel, I want to apologize for taking out a disproportionate amount of my frustration on you. My frustration is with the vast majority of the world, and yet you are the only one who is really subject to my wrath about it. So that's not fair of me. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be such a dick. I did at the time, but I regret it now. Is a more accurate thing to say. I did intend to be such a dick, but my anger was misplaced. You weren't the deserving target of it. So there's that. I started coaching Chloe ISTP in debate. We'll see how that goes. So far we're just cutting cards and talking about the topic and stuff. She seems to understand things well. Of course, the challenge is going to be getting her to have confidence speaking them all in real time and such. Her mom keeps saying she's shy. I keep explaining to her mom she's not shy, she's an ISTP. But, the mom and I never really quite see eye to eye about that stuff. We had a conversation just the other day in which I said, listen, you need to understand there are some things in life that are like, oh, I'm going to run a marathon in 2 months and I get winded after just half a mile, in which you need to train a lot more probably, right? And that's going to help get you a lot closer to your goal. But there are other things in life where it's like, hey, I'm too tall to be a horse jockey, but I really want to be a horse jockey. Maybe if I work really hard on squatting down and behaving like I'm shorter and otherwise thinking myself shorter and trying to behave like short people, then I will also be short enough to be a jockey. Well, that's not something you can do, right? And she said, yes, well, I think this is like the first one. I said, well, I know you do, but I think it's like the second one. And this is the same argument we always have because you think everything's like the first one. This ESTJ mom, don't get me wrong, I have a great deal of fondness for this woman. I love the fact that she works with me the way she does. In other words, that she's not busting my chops for being unprofessional. She's not, she's cool, right? So she knows that I'm kind of like, I don't really want to always be I think of myself as having two real jobs. One is being a debate coach, and one is being a typologist, basically. But the thing is, she wants me to do a lot of stuff with her kids that's not debate sometimes. And she understands that I don't want to do it. And so, everything's an interface with her. So it's all good. Sometimes she gets mad at me, but it's fine. And, we have very honest conversations with each other. And sometimes we have arguments and stuff. But it's fine. I don't know. It's like, I really like that family. They're cool.
Yeah, they are.
They're super cool. Everybody in the family, I like them all. And yet, I'm never going to get anywhere trying to explain to her in I, which is basically, you've got to accept that you can't remediate everything that you can observe as a deficit. And that's the basic disagreement that we have is she recognizes things as being deficits in her kids, and she wants to remediate them. Jeffrey's so disorganized. We need to spend time teaching him how to be organized or something. Well, it's not going to work because he countervalues it. It's not that he doesn't know how, it's that he doesn't want to. And he's always going to kind of fight against it. And it's like, well, we got to teach Chloe how to improvisationally come up with random ideas. I'm like, you're not going to do it. You can't teach a fish to fly or a bird to eat moon rocks. So anyway,
It's so true though.
it's nice working with Chloe on it anyway. It's very different than working with Jeffrey on it. With Chloe, she's skittish about saying meow or meow. She wants to make sure she has the right answer before she says it. With Jeffrey, he's like hard to control. Like he doesn't say the thing I say to say. He says his own variation of it that adds some extra shit that fucks it up, So it's like, in some sense, it's a lot easier working with an ISTP, but I also know that it's going to be frustrating once we get to the spot where I'm expecting her to reproduce all this understanding as talking out loud in real time. Okay, so anyway, that's it. Goodbye, everybody. Remember, it's not an authentic Talking with Famous People live stream unless you get some of that Rachel coughing in the background. So don't lament it. Celebrate it for its proof of authenticity.
Aww.
Goodbye, sweetheart, because it's time to go.